The murder trial of the 5 men accused of killing soccer star Senzo Meyiwa resumes in the High Court in Pretoria today. Meyiwa's longtime friend Tumelo Madlala is expected to be cross-examined by Advocate Zandile Mshololo. During his testimony, previous testimony, Madlala claimed that accused number 2, Bongani Ntanzi, was one of the intruders inside the house the day Meyiwa was shot dead. We now bring in our colleague Chriselda Lewis, who's live from the court. Chriselda, just give us a recap of the trial.
Well, Desiree, you're correct. We resumed today after quite a while, of course. Tumelo Madlala, who is the best friend of the late soccer star Senzo Meyiwa, expected to be back on the stand before the cross-examination of Advocate Zandile Mshololo, who is for accused number 5, starts. We're expecting Timothy Tobane, who is the legal representative for accused 1 to 4, to continue with his cross-examination of Madlala. Of course, you heard the last time, this was the first witness, or is the first witness, to take the stand that was inside the house at the time that Senzo Meyiwa was called. You recall that Madlala had basically told this court how these intruders had entered the house, how the first one had entered, the second one had entered, how, that Bongani Ntanzi, who you're referring to, of course, accused number 2, who is also applying for bail. You'd recall back in October, he had put through a bail application here at the High Court in Pretoria. We're still waiting for an outcome of that matter, but indeed, the accused number 2, who's since applied for bail, was pointed out by Madlala inside this court. He claims that this was the person that Senzo Meyiwa had basically pinned, against the wall when all of this was taking place inside the home of Kelly Khumalo's home. He also detailed inside this court how Senzo Meyiwa had been taken to the hospital, where the gunshot was on Senzo Meyiwa's body, and how a subsequent fight had also broken out at the hospital between Kelly Khumalo as well as Mandisa, who is the estranged wife of Senzo Meyiwa. You would also recall, of course, that the defense contending in this instance, Timothy Tobane, for accused 1 to 4, saying, in fact, what had happened inside the house was that Longwe Twala had entered the house with a gun, and at some point that gun had been handed to Kelly Khumalo, and she had mistakenly shot Senzo Meyiwa at close range. This is a version that Madlala denies had happened inside that house, but relating to that, the defense are basically contending that it was one of the individuals, and in terms of what Timothy Tobane is saying is that it was Kelly Khumalo who had pulled the trigger. What we also understand at this particular point is we're still waiting for a response there. So you'd recall that Kelly Khumalo's lawyer, Magdalene Munsami, was on a watching brief at this court at some point, but then was removed from it on the basis that, some of the other legal representatives believe that she shouldn't be here on the basis of the possibility that her client could be called to this court to testify. We've not yet gotten a response from her on questions that we asked pertaining to whether she has an intention to return to this court. We had gotten a sense about the fact that there might be that possibility of her wanting to return on a watching brief to this court, but we've not gotten a response yet pertaining to that. But we're expecting, Madlala to be placed under, quite tough cross-examination on a number of issues pertaining to, when he believed Senzo Meyiwa had actually died, because the defense is contending that Meyiwa had actually passed away at the house already where he had been shot, and that the occupants inside the house had known that at the time and had not called paramedics, and instead had decided to rush him to the hospital, knowing very well that he had already passed away. So those are some of the instances, issues pertaining to the relationship between Senzo Meyiwa as well as Madlala. He has been consistently referred to as a close friend of Senzo Meyiwa. But you must recall as well, some of the things that raised eyebrows inside this court was that he didn't, deny the fact that he had sold some of the personal photographs that he has with Meyiwa to Netflix for the documentary, which you would recall was aired just days before this trial had initially begun. So we're also expecting, the defense to continue to question the sequence of events. He also told this court that after Kelly Khumalo, her sister, and himself had gone to Malberton, to the home that Senzo Meyiwa and Kelly Khumalo had shared, we understand, at some point, Longwe Twala's father, Chiko Twala, according to the version of events that Madlala is giving, he says that Chiko Twala had arrived at Kelly Khumalo's home that she'd shared with Senzo Meyiwa and basically offered her an international trip. There were also testimony about how police had come to the house in Malberton, and according to the version that Madlala gives, he says that Kelly Khumalo had switched off the lights. She did not want police to come inside the house, and after receiving a telephone call, according to the version that Madlala gives this court, a telephone call from whom he believes may have been someone powerful, the police then had subsequently left the Malberton home. So we're expecting a lot more in terms of challenging the events that Madlala had pointed out in this court in terms of what he says happened on the day that Senzo Meyiwa was killed and what happened after that.
Chriselda, such a lot to wade through, but just at the beginning of the trial, one of the big highlights was the family coming through to the trial, of course, with so many postponements and so many stops and starts. How is the attendance of the family, the Meyiwa family?
Desiree, they're likely to be back at court this morning. You would recall with the multiple delays, they had really expressed frustration about the fact that they had to consistently travel between Durban as well as Pretoria in order to attend the proceedings. With the constant postponements that we had seen prior, they had taken a step back somewhat, and only when we heard that Tumelo Madlala, who was, of course, one of the first occupants to take the stand that were inside the house at the time that Senzo Meyiwa was killed, they were bound to return to this court to hear what he was going to say. The family has consistently contended that those that were inside the house at the time that Senzo Meyiwa was killed need to come and tell this court what happened. They need to say what exactly transpired on that particular day and to give a version that will make sense to them. At the end of the day, what they want is justice. What they say they want is the truth of what happened on that day. So a huge possibility that they will be back inside a court again this morning. Let me just take a look behind me, and you would see some of the accused just arriving in court this morning. I'm going to ask my colleague to come with me, Neo Mbende. You'd see Bongani Ntanzi just arriving for court proceedings, the start of that. And court proceedings, of course, he returns to court this morning without a decision on the bail application that was made in October. And certainly I don't think, I'm not allowed to speak to them at this particular stage. I don't think that the defense, Desiree, would be very pleased with that. We've been on a tight leash, you would know, as journalists covering this particular trial. But of course, Bongani Ntanzi this morning returning to court without any decision on the bail application. I know that his legal representatives were not very impressed. It's about slightly over a month now that that matter was heard inside this court, in fact, the High Court here in Pretoria, and no decision has yet been made on this. You would recall that Ntanzi had maintained in that bail application that he does not know anything about what happened relating to the killing of Senzo Meyiwa. He was at work at the time that this had happened. The defense had also maintained at that particular time that, they would, or the state in particular, would go and say that, the employers at the time that this had transpired, he had not been at work. They had been trying to advance that argument in this particular matter. So I know that the defense was not too pleased with the fact that, there's no decision at this particular point pertaining to that bail application, which was made over a month ago now. You'd see some of the security personnel being brought in from correctional services as well. This is nothing different to what we've seen, Desiree, in the past. This is what would usually transpire in this particular case. But of course, we'll wait for matters to get underway at this particular stage. Timothy Tabane expected this morning to complete that cross-examination before Advocate Zandile Mshololo for accused number 5 is expected to begin her cross-examination of the witness currently on the stand.